So my background is dairy farming, vetting, animals, health, milk procurement, farming in Australia, all that sort of business. So I just thought your land looked fantastic for dairy farming driving in. With 1,000 mils of rainfall, I thought perfect. After farming in Australia and droughts and fires, etc. Coming back to New Zealand in 2010, that's when I did my Masters in freshwater ecology and policy, and decided that if we apply the diagnostic process to our farms, our landscapes, and actually to the country, we can work on a long-term plan. So that was in Hawke's Bay. We were there not that long ago, and man, when you look around the country, you think, wow, we've got some big jobs to do. And really, are we allowed to swear here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because we always talk about getting shit done. We really want to just start seeing stuff happening, but part of that is starting at the start and saying, what are the problems? So if you go to the doctor, he goes, what's your history, John? And you look straight for where the disease is, which might be an estuary that's knackered or a lake that's knackered, but you've got to understand how it got there, what were the barriers to it getting back to health, and then put in a plan for its recovery. And ecological terms, that can take 10 to 20 years. And a lot of our funding for catchment groups, we've got farmers all excited, only 2 to 3 years. That's not really what we need. Okay, so I talk about bridging the gap. So how do we actually get stuff happening? Because that's what we see in catchment groups. I'm working at a national level as well for all our catchment groups, trying to understand how we keep the momentum going. We've got some really good momentum started. Our leaders and our visionaries, a bit like John and a few of you here, want to just keep going. So how do we keep funding that? And in 2020 I was on the Jobs for Nature funding panel, and there was 1.3 billion sort of spread around the country quite fast. Not always KPIs that were going to demonstrate ecological improvement, but more about activity rather than ecological outcomes. But what we did get is a lot of farmers saying, hey, this is really good, we really like catchment groups. We go in big ones like Waiwanaka, covering about 300,000 hectares with large farms and iconic lakes to protect. It was kind of easier to get that focus because they had really nice lakes to look at. I'll show you our estuary, one of the 5 worst estuaries on the coastal Bay of Plenty, and it's harder to get people excited when you've got a really degraded water body. And I know you guys all drain into Lake Wairarapa, and what's your catchment size? Michael, not playing on your phone. What's your catchment size? You had a vision for the whole catchment.
I know it's 347,000.
Oh, okay, cool.
Really?
Yeah, so you're 10 times the size of our catchment. But what we're saying is that the leaders and the innovators want to keep going. They want to move at pace, and they want to be doing stuff on their farms, and they don't want bureaucratic barriers. They want to be doing stuff. So bottom-up change rather than top-down regulation. I farm in the Rotorua Lakes. We've had 23 years of environment court battles, of farmers just getting scared of their councils, and it's dependent on overseer. It's challenging. But the other thing, being the doctor again, you've got your doctor's hats on, we have got 2 worlds colliding. With agriculture, and right up to probably 2010, we were focused on linear growth, more output, more cows per hectare, more output per hectare. We weren't very efficient with our resources. No one really cared about animal welfare. We had high water use, intensification. We were really looking at monocultural farm systems. We were putting wrong land use in the wrong place. Look at Canterbury. We had high output, low value, and that's what we were told. The more you do, the richer you're going to get. And no one talked about the sweet spot and diminishing profitability. But now the focus is on ecologically and ethically driven values. And we've got to look at things, we've got to be looking for the sweet spot in our businesses, in our catchments, and as a country. And with Trump getting in last night, we're really going to start looking for our sweet spot. We're in some challenges. So how do we bridge that gap from the farm to the catchment? So bottom up, looking at that bigger catchment. We've got to define the problem, understand the landscape, and how did we get there? Regional councils, we hope, have got really good catchment science. We really hope that they're going to tell us what's the load reduction required in Lake Wairarapa from the activities up here, How did we get here? Do we need to make that lake deeper? Is it too shallow? Is there too much sediment in there? What is the problem? That's not us for us as farmers to work out, but we'd love to be told exactly where we're going and what we have to do to fix it. We need to understand the history. What was the landscape? How did we get here? And how are we going to get there? Because we do have to move faster than we've ever moved before. And we have to understand our catchment really well. I'm going to give you examples of our coastal catchment in Bay of Plenty, where we've got an estuary that doesn't drain very fast. It actually behaves quite a lot like a lake, slow moving water body, not much flushing, full of sediment, all the things that you've got similar in your lake at the bottom of your catchment. And then you've got to think about what's the differential diagnosis. What do you see? Is it just because you've got a lot of heavy animals on hills, or is it because you've got some dairy farms on the lowlands, or whatever? You've got to understand what are all the cumulative causes creating the problem. And then put in risk assessments and how you're going to reduce the risk of continued degradation. And then you have to be, what we've learnt in our catchment is that the treatments that you put in place, you have to be really agile and keep coming back and saying, well, we've done a bit of that, but we can't afford to keep going with that, but we're still going to keep managing that. So this is quite an adaptive management process. Okay, let's go up to the coastal Bay of Plenty. We've got about 40,000 hectares that look like this along the coastal Bay of Plenty. The rivers have been straightened. I can play you a bring that video later if we have time. We've got a lot of drained wetlands. So this is the Pongakawa River going into the coastal, this big Pokina. Okay, so you know where I mean. That's Masterton on the other side. You'll see a lot of sediment that's just been shot out through these Auckland rivers. We'll get this high rainfall events and stop banks, and then just flush it into the estuary. Then we haven't got a lot of flush out of that, and we haven't got a big mouth to the estuary, so we've got a heavily degraded estuary. And we've got a whole lot of challenges as well. We've also got a lot of those lowland farmers thinking about exiting farming, but we haven't got a land use transition for them. Plus, I'll tell you about it, we've got sea level rise, we've got drainage, we've got pump stations that are contaminated estuary. It's like stacks on the mill, and you just want to actually put a pillow over your head and not think about it too much. And then we've got councils starting to talk about managed retreat, but really not an answer for probably 200 of our lowland dairy farms down here that are facing sea level rise, saturated soils, etc. We can't keep putting our heads in the sand. Trying to have that conversation with the councils can be difficult at times. This is an upper catchment, still dairy farming on 3,000 or 4,000 hectares of quite steep land. That's why I thought your land looked beautiful. And we know that land that's when it's over 26 degrees is when you start getting those horizontal tracks around the hill. So you sort of pretty much can look at the land, and John will talk about this a bit more. But we probably shouldn't be, we need to be slowing the flow off those hills in the mid to upper catchment, because we can't just buy out all those dairy farms down the bottom for 14 or 20 million. We really need to slow the flow from the top of the catchment to the bottom. It's a 34,000 hectare catchment. This is 10 times the size. Your one.
Yeah.
And it's really good working with John, because you had a logic model approach to what we had to achieve. We were funded by philanthropic funders, so slightly different outcomes than Jobs for Nature and MPI. And we had to achieve sort of 9 or 10 KPIs around getting about 500 hectares of steep land retired, the land that I showed you, in the upper catchment in a 3-year period. So you had to get farmers on board quite quickly, which was quite challenging. And also we had a goal of planting about 300,000 native trees, fish passages, a whole lot of jobs. But what we did do is managed to get out of the council the mapping for the steep land that was in pasture that had to be retired potentially. When John did his back of the envelope budget to fix this catchment that we thought was just we looked at it as a farm. What's it going to cost to get our 34,000 hectare farm to moderate health? It was about 100 million. I don't have time to go into that in depth, but will you?
No, but it's quite good. You can say, okay, that 34,000 hectare farms are going to cost 100 million. So you've got some metrics around cost per hectare. So you can put a multiplier on your, just put another 0 on it. Yeah, you go to 1 billion.
No, it's not going to cost them that much though, because they're not going to have to buy all the dairy farms down the bottom.
No, they'll be a bit less. But, and probably you got less steep land as a ratio. But yeah.
But you
It's
do
up
have
to
to
get some
think,
idea of your budget and the time frame.
and you do have to think in that level of scale, because you want to know that are you getting anywhere and how's that looking for you, because you've got to be measuring what's happening all the time. That's one thing that came out of Jobs for Nature. It was all about just reporting how many jobs or full-time units you had. There was no compulsion to measure baselines and look at 5 and 10 year plans. You have to look at the land use. We've got, you know, a lot of forestry up top. We've got 38% of it is in dairy in that mid to lower area, and dairy down the bottom, and horticulture. Kiwi fruit makes up around 5% of the area, but very intensive. And a lot of land use change has gone on with sort of taking the tops off the hills, etc., which probably hasn't helped the estuary too much. So a very intensive area, 34,000 hectares, land value from 50,000 to 1 million a hectare. Yep. And so, you know, we can't talk about size, we have to talk about value and intensity, don't we? So these sort of things keep you awake at night. You've got 3 years of funding and you're going, shivers, we've got to, actually that slide's not really right. We've got to reduce the E. coli in the estuary by about 5 times, that's wrong. Nitrogen load down by 70%, phosphorus load, sediment down, and that's what the estuary looks like after 30 mils of rain in September. You know, it's not even that much rain, but you can see the colour of the water. And you're going, okay, where do we start? I mean, there is a question, do you just walk away from the most heavily degraded places in the country because of the cost of fixing them? And those sort of reductions are only just to get it back to a moderate state of health to what it was in 2014. The other confounding variables, don't worry, we'll have some positive stuff and he'll finish off and be really positive. But this is like typical for a lot of New Zealand, so just think of it as a snapshot. We've got 480 dairy farms from Waihi down to Waitahi in the east. In the next 5 years, 200 of them have to upgrade their effluent consents and spend 500,000 probably on average on each system to get clip tanks above ground, do soil moisture deficit irrigation, and that'll be hard because we've got sea level rise coming in 2040. But we know that that probably won't fix the E. coli problem because 90% of E. coli comes off heavy rainfall events on the paddocks. So then you go, well, if you're going to stay in dairying on the coast, you may need to then put in covered standoff pads. And if you're going to stay in dairying, you've also got to face this, that Bay of Plenty is telling us that we're going to have 0.3 of a metre sea level rise in 15 years. I'm not quite sure how they got that, but that's what they're telling us. And it's just going to be challenging. So we having to have hard conversations from our catchment groups with our council saying, is dairy farming still going to be here in 15 years? Or are these guys going to have to spend 200 or 300 million to stay here, and is that still going to be possible? We need a conversation about land use transition and how that's going to look. I don't want to confuse you with this, but I'm just proving that we've been told 0.28 metres of sea level rise by 2040. That's not very far away, eh? 15 years, and 1.5 times more likely are those really heavy rainfall events. Again, I don't think this is too dissimilar to a lot of other areas. I've just mentioned that. Again, dairy farming down here is pretty challenging. So these guys with these in-ground unlined ponds are probably going to have to do something. And it has forced 30% of our dairy farmers out in the last 3 years in our catchment because of they're not quite sure what's coming. There's business uncertainty around policies, which we all know does everyone's head in, and they're facing all these other challenges. Oh, it's still depressing, John. I'm sorry about this. I'll get on to the good stuff soon. See, do you guys have stop banks? Mm-hmm. Oh, so you know what I mean. Are you allowed to stand your cars on stop banks?
Means yes.
Oh, okay, so this is where we got challenged as well, because as a catchment group, received $2 million of funding from our local philanthropists. It was pretty awkward when we went down there to this really degraded estuary, and there's 1,000 cows on there for 90 days in the winter. So what do you do when you're the catchment leader? You go, maybe we should bring this up with the regional council, or... So that's what we did. We rang the pollution hotline, because we thought, well, we're not going to face those farmers, because a few of them are doing it and they're having a bit of trouble, but there should be legislation around this. Ring up the pollution hotline. No, they go home at 5 o'clock. Oh, bloody hell. So I had to go down there and take photos of the cows. I had to get photos of them defecating in the water for the pollution hotline to listen. And then they come back at 9 o'clock next morning, the cows are gone again. So we had to take photos of them, but then I thought, I'll just take water samples above and below the cows, and showed that above the cows, below the cows, it was 8,000 times higher for E. coli, and surely you don't want that when you've got a degraded estuary there. Anyway, it ended up like a 5-month litigation period where the council didn't manage it, DOC didn't manage it, NPI didn't manage it. So we had multi-agency kind of, no one was accountable. So you may have similar things down here, so just be aware of that if you're running a catchment group and you're trying to improve things. Oh, I'm not going to depress you anymore. Because drained peat's a problem, but you haven't got drained peat, have you? Yeah, so you've got your worry about emissions coming out of drained peat now. So what we see in this new landscape is that catchment groups are a safe place for in terms of behaviour change, is a safe place for our visionaries who are out there 30 years ahead of the others. They can have good conversations, and they're also the ones that move first. They move 20 or 30 years ahead. So we call them our lighthouse farmers, and our project focused on those lighthouse farmers and encouraging them to do more and wrapping transdisciplinary teams around them to keep them going faster. But now, of course, we've got the market pulling them faster and faster as well. This is where ultimately everybody probably has to stay in their lane. We see that the regional councils have a very big role in bringing either helping the laggards along or helping them maybe go land use change and pushing them up to the middle. But I think there's a place for both out there. The catchment groups to keep going, we're just going to work out how we keep them being funded to keep our leaders going faster, and regional councils providing us with the science and compliance for those ones that are slower. I did mention about E. coli, only 10% of it getting to the estuary, and probably same for your lake, is coming from unlined ponds. Overland flow paths are the main channels for E. coli into our receiving water bodies, and then obviously the canals, pump stations and estuary. So yeah, big problems to fix. We love Bay of Plenty Regional Council, but they've got a love affair with constructed wetlands. Does anyone know how much they cost to build? Well, this one, because we've got big problems, right? I've just been talking to you about our problems, and then it's like a band-aid, because 770,000 for that one, and it removes 160 kilos of nitrogen for that 770,000 from 2 hectares. So these are all the questions. Is fixing effluence ponds going to fix the E. coli problem? Or John's going to talk a lot about retiring steep slopes and the cost of doing that and getting stock off those hills and slowing the flow from the top to the bottom. We think that's a really effective way to mitigate some of these contaminants. Constructed wetlands, we're going to do the maths on it, but it looks like it's probably over $4,000 per kilo of nitrogen removed, as compared with that it's low cost planting method, taking land that leaches 45 down to 3 kilos, and that works out at about $150 per kilo of nitrogen removed. So what we'd like to see is that our rates are spent in a prudent manner and there's accountability from people spending the money. That's as naughty as I'll get, John. So, and the other one is, will systems shifting systems, land use change. The big question now is that we really want to see economically efficient solutions at broad scale that give us good ecological outcomes. So we need really good metrics as well. So again, we did touch on this about the whole of catchment approach. We knew that probably to bring it back to moderate state of health, and we didn't use catchment modelling, we didn't have enough money, but we knew that if we retired around 3,000 hectares, so for you, we used maybe 30,000 hectares, I don't know, you're 10 times as big as us. Reinstatement of lots of little wetlands down through the catchment. John's going to talk about this and taking that farm scale approach. There was some modelling done to say we needed 1,400 little detainment bunds all the way down the catchment from 400 metres above sea level down to the bottom. The issue is that our council, you can only do that with a consent, so you've got to spend 30,000 before you put the detainment bund in. So again, barriers to change. Somehow that's got to change because our farmers want to put in detainment bunds all the way down and just slow the flow. And John's going to touch on integrated weed and pest control. So lots of things to do, but you've got to take that whole integrated approach. Bottom up change. So farmers want to change, we've got to remove the barriers, and we've got to keep people moving forward with kitchen window projects, eh John? We call it kitchen windows because you want to see what you're doing. We do need good measures, and we need to be really clear on what our vision is, 5 and 10 years out. The other thing is on farms we need readily available KPIs, like how much steep land is being retired at an economically efficient way, or how many wetlands have been reinstated, or how many critical source areas have been put in. That also linked to catchment levels. I'll explain that in just a minute. And we know that land use change may be necessary. And with some of our lighthouse farmers, when we wrapped a transdisciplinary team around them, they actually said, well, why am I milking my 800 cows with 400 of them on those hills at the back? I actually might be better off with a good forestry plan and concentrate on my animals on the best land. And they really want to put natives in, but they couldn't afford to do all natives, so we got a forester in and did all the landscaping and pretty much came with a whole new landscape plan for the farm, which John's going to talk about that. But a big thing is having a transdisciplinary team, because a dairy advisor who talks about systems doesn't know about forestry, your sheep and beef guy, so you have to wrap good people around and get them all talking to each other. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but actually just say and again it's quite overwhelming, but a lot of things join up. When you do one thing, like right land use in the right place, you get human well-being out of it as well. So one of our farmers that changed their whole farm system, their staff just love working there now because once a day the cows are doing way better milk than they ever used to because they're not climbing up and down those hills all day. And they've just got a big smile on their face. The whole time they're going, why did we intensify? Because we were told that more is better. But it took us into the red zone. And the other thing is the farm level proxies need to link to what's needed for the catchment level. I'm not going to talk about that. So we also need our regional councils to be really helpful in giving us good science and good maps. We really need good maps. We haven't been able to get those out of our regional council, so we've been having to use surveys, which cost us quite a bit for our program to give us a lot of the really good farm level stuff. And then what we need is farm advisors who pick up where things have got to go, where the farm's at. And John, you're going to go through the 10 steps, aren't you? And the other complication that's come in the last 3 or 4 years is really what is the market asking for? What's Nestle asking for? What are the science-based targets? All these things. But don't panic because actually it all meshes together. Sometimes when you pull one lever, you get a whole lot of other win-wins. And that's the story that we actually need to be wrapping around our farmers and helping them with at a local, place-based level. We saw those cows standing at the bottom of the hill the other day. This is that farm still after a fair bit of retirement's gone in. So lots of exotics. The natives have gone into what John will call the red zones, the really vulnerable areas. And the cows have got a nice sheltered paddock that's going to be amongst pine trees shortly. So within 3 years, these guys made really significant changes because they realised that when they had good people to talk to with good advice, it was what they had been doing was on a treadmill, which wasn't the most due. So at a farm level with our 15 farm systems that we dived quite deep into, which gave us a good baseline, we were measuring greenhouse gases. As you can see on that farm, they came down quite significantly. That's on a per hectare basis, not a per kilogram milk solids basis. Phosphorus losses, again, we're getting all these win-wins. Lower greenhouse gases per hectare. A significant reduction in phosphorus. And when we take that out to catchment level, we're going, hey, we've reduced 6 tonnes of phosphorus getting into that estuary. We've reduced nitrogen loss. So that farm was leaching 59 and by 23, 24 down to, nitrogen loss leaching 39. So again, happy people, better land, better landscape, a better system in place, and at the end of the day, the estuary, if we can get a lot of people to start following those lighthouse farmers with that systems approach, and they're more profitable as well, that's what we need, those place-based leaders. And just that's still that same farm I showed you the photos on. You can see the dairy platform was making up 75% of the farm. By 23, 24, it was down to just making up 65% of the farm. The yellow is native, so a significant amount of native planting, and exotic forest planted. I think there's about 32 hectares just planted in that short term. They're going to keep going with that as well. Once they're on that pathway of change, they know who to go to and what to do. We take these sort of maps out to catchment scale so that we can say, hey, in our 34,000 hectare farm now, we've got all these good things going on with our lighthouse farmers, and we can start adding up. Admittedly, we're not going to get to all 650 landowners in the catchment, but we can say on those 15 or 20 farms where we've worked with people for the last 3 years, we know we've got X amount of reduction, so we can interpolate that out to the whole catchment and start making some assumptions about benefits to catchment scale.
Do they have runoffs? Do they have wintering young stock off?
Yeah, a lot of them had probably a parallel farm where they did have runoffs next to the dairy or not far away. All of them actually were in the catchment. Yeah. And then I'm happy to make this available to other people. We're not going to go through all these numbers now because you've given me 5 minutes and I'm just about there, so that's all good. But again, this is a real farm. We've done this on overseer and we've done profitability, etc. But you can see significant reductions. It all depends on where you start as your baseline, right? But emissions intensity down by 21%, emissions greenhouse gas per hectare down by 30%. They stopped importing any feed, which is great for them because they've got slightly lower stocking rate on the better land. The cows are happier. They're doing 50 kilos of milk solids more per cow, even though they've gone to once a day because they've got rid of all that crap land at the back. And yeah, just a good story. I've done a great little video talking about how I've gotten to the blue zone of life now. So 3 years, and we did cover a lot of ground. She was fairly intensive, but that's almost what you've got to do. Get your leading farmers, and if they're willing to tell their story and just support them through it, I think that's a great way to start getting some change. Our problem is that at a catchment group, we've run out of funding, there's no more funding left. We're going, how do we keep this momentum going? Because there is a lot of momentum in the catchment now. Yeah, thank you. Is everybody...